Welcome to the last calm word. Let us get started with today's story. The hotel called me on a Tuesday to confirm the couple's spa package for the honeymoon suite my girlfriend had booked for the weekend. That was the first problem. The second problem was that I hadn't booked anything. I wasn't going anywhere that weekend, and the name of the man she'd listed on the reservation was not mine. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear, the coffee going cold in my hand, and this pleasant woman from the front desk cheerfully reading back the details of a romantic getaway I was apparently paying for. 2 nights. Ocean View Suite. Champagne on arrival. A couple's massage at 4 on Saturday. And when I asked her, very calmly, to repeat the name of the guest on the booking, she said it like it meant nothing to her, because to her it didn't. To me, it was a name I knew. It was Daniel. It was her ex. Let me back up, because if I just drop you here, you'll think I'm the kind of guy who snoops, who reads texts over her shoulder, who counts receipts and checks the odometer, and I promise you I wasn't. For 3 years, I trusted Renata the way you trust the floor under your feet. You don't test it every morning. You don't get down on your hands and knees and check the boards. You just assume it's there, because it's always been there. Because the whole point of a floor is that you don't have to think about it. We met at a friend's barbecue, the boring, suburban kind, with warm beer, and a dog that wouldn't stop stealing burgers off people's plates. And she laughed at something I said, really laughed, the kind that folds a person in half, and I was gone, just like that. I spent the rest of that afternoon inventing reasons to stand near her. Within a year, she'd moved into my place, her shoes by my door, her shampoo in my shower, her handwriting on the grocery list, stuck to my fridge. Within 2, we were talking about rings and school districts, and whether the spare room should be an office or something else, something smaller, something with a crib in it. I made decent money. Not rich, but comfortable. I worked in commercial insurance, which sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry. And honestly, most days it was. But it paid the mortgage, and it kept the lights on, and it let her chase the thing she actually loved, which was interior styling for other people's houses. She had a real eye for it. She could walk into a dull gray room and see the warm, alive version of it hiding underneath. And 3 weeks later, that version would exist. I used to think that was the most romantic thing about her, that she could look at something ordinary and see what it could become. I think about that differently now, because that's exactly what she did with me too, isn't it? She looked at a dull, comfortable, trusting man, and she saw what he could become. A blank check, a credit line, with a heartbeat. There were signs, if I'm being fair to myself, small ones, the kind you only see clearly, with the lights turned all the way up afterward. A year in, I'd found a receipt in her coat pocket for a hotel bar downtown. A Friday, she told me she was at a workshop, and when I asked her about it, gently, no accusation in my voice, she'd looked at me with those wide, honest eyes and said the client had insisted on meeting there, and it was so boring, and she'd only had a club soda. And did I not trust her? Did I not trust her? That was always the pivot. She could take any question, no matter how reasonable, and fold it in half until it became a question about me, about my jealousy, about my insecurity, until I was the one apologizing. And I fell for it, every single time, because I did trust her, and because a man in love will believe almost anything, rather than believe the one thing that would end his whole life. So I let it go. I let all of it go, year after year, 100 tiny things I filed under nothing, and she learned, slowly, patiently, exactly how much she could get away with. She was studying me the whole time. I just didn't know I was the room she was redecorating. Her income came in waves. Good months where a big client would pay all at once, and dead months where nothing came in at all, and she'd get quiet and anxious, and I'd tell her not to worry about it. So we'd agreed early on, back when agreeing felt like building something together, that the household ran on my card, and she'd throw money in when a client paid. To make that simple, I'd added her as an authorized user on my main credit card. Same account, her own name embossed on her own little piece of plastic, spending against my credit line, my history, my score. It felt like trust. It felt like partnership. It felt, at the time, like the smartest, warmest thing 2 people who loved each other could possibly do, folding our lives together so tightly you couldn't tell where one of us ended and the other began. That card is the entire reason I'm telling you this story. Instead of some other one, some sadder one, where I never found out at all, and married her, and raised kids with her, and only learned the truth 20 years too late. Because here's the thing about being the primary account holder that Renata never once stopped to consider. Every charge is mine. Every alert pings my phone. Every statement lands in my inbox with my name printed across the top in bold. She forgot that, or she never really understood it in the first place. Or, and this is the version I've come to believe in the long nights since, She thought I was too checked out, too trusting, too much of a soft, comfortable soft touch to ever actually look. She thought the floor would never look up at her. So back to the phone call. The woman from the hotel is reading me my own crime scene in this warm customer service voice, and I do the only thing my scrambled brain can manage, which is to keep her talking. I lower my voice into something friendly and a little embarrassed, and I say, "Oh gosh, I think there might be a mix-up with the reservation. Could you just read me everything on file so I can sort it out on my end?" And she does. Bless her, she reads me all of it. She reads me the arrival date, that coming Saturday. She reads me the suite number. She reads me the dinner reservation attached to the booking, a tasting menu for 2 at 8. And then she reads me the little note Renata must have typed herself, because it was in her voice. It was unmistakably her. And it said, "And I will never, as long as I live, forget this. A long time coming, just us two. No phones. No phones." From the woman who was booking a honeymoon suite on a phone, she was absolutely certain I would never think to check. I thanked the front desk lady. I told her, in the steadiest voice I owned, that I'd call right back to confirm the details. And I hung up. And then I stood in that kitchen for what felt like an hour but was probably 90 seconds, listening to the refrigerator hum and the clock tick, feeling the whole floor I had trusted for 3 solid years quietly, silently tilt sideways beneath my feet. Now, most people, right here, at this exact moment, would do one of two things. They'd explode, grab the phone, and call her screaming in the middle of her fake workday. Or they'd collapse, slide down the cabinets, and sit on the cold kitchen tile and cry until they couldn't breathe. And I want to be completely honest with you because this story only works if I'm honest. I did neither. Something colder than either of those happened to me. My hands, which had been shaking, went still. My mind, which should have been screaming, went very, very quiet. It's the same thing that happens to me at work when a catastrophic claim comes across my desk and the whole office is running around with their hair on fire. And I realize with this strange floating calm that I'm the only person in the room who isn't panicking. Because that's my job. That's my entire career. The one skill I've built over 15 years. I read the fine print that everyone else skims past. I find the one detail buried on page 9, clause 4, that quietly changes the entire meaning of the document. I don't react to the story people tell me. Stories are cheap. People will tell you anything. I react to the evidence they leave behind, the paper trail, the timestamps, the things that can't lie, because they were never smart enough to know they were being watched. And Renata, God help her, standing in whatever showroom she was actually standing in that afternoon, had just left me a mountain of it. I opened my banking app right there in the kitchen, and there it was, plain as day. The resort charge, still pending, posted 2 days earlier, $480. And here's the thing that made my stomach drop. It hadn't even registered to me as strange when the notification came in because we charged absolutely everything to that card. Groceries, gas, her fabric samples, my dentist. It had blended right in with our whole ordinary life. I kept scrolling. And once I started really looking, once I stopped skimming and started reading my own account the way I read a suspicious claim, the fog lifted and I began to see the shape of the thing, the whole architecture of it. A charge at an expensive lingerie boutique 3 weeks back that I'd waved off as a client gift. A steakhouse on a Thursday night. The same Thursday she'd texted me she was stuck working late and to eat without her. A florist. She had sent someone flowers. On my card, I sat with that one for a second. The flowers. Because there's a special kind of sick that comes from realizing your own money bought the roses that another man got to smell. And then I opened the florist website, and I found the exact arrangement. Because the charge amount matched only one thing on their menu. A 24 red rose bouquet with a handwritten card, $75, and there was a little checkbox on the order form for a gift message, and I sat there in the dark imagining what she might have written on it. In my money. To him. I kept going. I pulled 6 months of statements, not 3, and I laid them side by side, and I started matching charges to the nights she'd told me she was busy. A Thursday late at the office, dinner for 2. A Sunday she said she was helping Dana move, a charge at a boutique hotel across town, day rate. A Wednesday she was at a trade show, movie tickets, 2 of them, 3 in the afternoon. Every lie she'd ever told me had a receipt, and I'd been the one paying it off at the end of every month, on autopay, without ever once looking at the itemized list. That was the part that truly gutted me, if I'm honest. Not just that she cheated on a schedule, methodically, with the calm confidence of someone who had done the math and decided I would never, ever check the register. She'd weaponized my own trust and turned it into a budget. Little charges, all of them, spread out over 3 months, each one small enough and ordinary enough to swim right past me, camouflaged inside the noise of a shared life. I felt sick, genuinely, physically sick, the kind where you have to grip the counter. But underneath the sick, there was something else. Something I am not proud of, but I refused to pretend wasn't there. I felt awake. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I felt completely, blindingly, electrically awake. And standing right there in that kitchen, I made myself a promise. I was not going to confront her. Not that night, not the next day, not until I was ready. Because I knew, with total certainty, that the second I confronted her, the evidence would start vanishing. The texts would get deleted. The story would start bending and softening and reshaping itself into something I couldn't fight. Because she was good. She was so good at telling stories that made the gray room look warm. So I did the single hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I put the phone face down on the counter. I finished making dinner. Chicken, rice, the green beans she liked. And when she came home that night, breezing through the door, smelling faintly of a cologne that was definitely not mine, launching into a long, funny story about her exhausting day at a showroom, I smiled at her. I kissed her on the cheek, and I told her the food was almost ready. She had no idea. None. She sat down across from me at the little table we'd bought together at a flea market our first summer, and she told me all about a client who couldn't decide between two nearly identical shades of gray, and she laughed at her own story, and I laughed right along with her, and the whole time, underneath the table, underneath the laughing, I was quietly building a case the exact same way I'd build one against a fraudulent claim. Clean, cold, documented. That night I lay next to her in the dark and listened to her breathe. This person I had planned an entire future around, and I planned a very different kind of weekend instead. And I have to tell you about those 4 days of waiting because they were the hardest days of my life. Harder than the lobby, harder than anything that came after. Living inside a lie you've decided not to expose yet is a special kind of torture. Every morning she'd stretch and yawn and ask me what I wanted for dinner, and I'd answer like a normal man, and every cell in my body would be screaming. On the Wednesday, she sat on the edge of the bed, painting her toenails a deep red I'd never seen her wear, and she caught me looking, and she smiled and said, "You like it?" And I said, "Yeah, it's nice." And I knew exactly who those red toes were for, and I said, "It's nice." On the Thursday, she got a text at dinner, and her whole face lit up before she remembered to hide it, and she flipped the phone over and said it was just Dana confirming the spa weekend, and I said, "Oh, good," and I passed her the salt. On the Friday, the night before, she packed her bag while humming, and she asked me, completely casually, whether her blue dress or the green one looked better on her, and I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and helped my girlfriend choose the outfit she was going to wear to cheat on me, and I said the blue. The blue brings out your eyes. It did. She wore the blue. I almost broke a dozen times over those 4 days. There were moments I'd have the banking app open in the bathroom, my thumb hovering over the screen, ready to just call her and end it. But every time, I'd think about the room, the one clean window, and I'd close the app and walk back out and smile. Patience is a muscle. Mine had never been so sore. Here is what I knew for certain. The trip was, that Saturday, 4 days out, the room was in my name, on my card, which meant, and this is the part she had completely forgotten, that I controlled that reservation absolutely. I could cancel it with one phone call. I could change it. I could call the hotel as the paying card holder and do very nearly anything I wanted with it, because in the eyes of that resort, I was the customer. She was a name on a booking. She had built her entire escape on a bridge that I owned, every plank of it. But canceling it felt small. Canceling felt like a slammed door, a tantrum, the move of a jealous boyfriend. And worse than that, it was a move she could survive. She'd get the cancellation alert, she'd panic for an afternoon, and then she'd simply rebook somewhere else, somewhere cash only, somewhere I couldn't see, and I'd have thrown away my one clear window into the truth for the cheap momentary satisfaction of ruining a weekend. No, I didn't want to slam a door. I wanted the truth out loud, in the open, with her standing in the full light of it, unable to spin it or soften it or cry it away, and I wanted it to cost her something real, something she couldn't refund. So over the next 2 days, I did the thing I am genuinely best at in this world. I screenshotted every single charge, the dates, the amounts, the locations, and I dropped them into a clean document, the same format I use at work, a timeline, because a timeline doesn't argue with you. A timeline doesn't burst into tears, and a timeline is very hard to explain away when it's sitting right there in black and white. Then I looked up Daniel. I only remembered him vaguely, the ex she'd mentioned 2 or 3 times in the early days. The one who had, in her telling, been the great tragic love that ended in heartbreak before I ever came along. She'd made it sound so sad. First real love, ended badly. Still a little tender if you pressed on it, so I'd learned not to press. I'd felt sorry for him, honestly, this faceless guy who'd lost her. Now, I looked at his profile with completely different eyes, cold professional eyes. And that is exactly where this story took. The turn I never in 100 years saw coming. The turn that flipped it from a sad little breakup into something so much bigger. Because Daniel was not a heartbroken single man pining for a lost love across the years. Daniel was married. There she was, all over his page. A woman named Claire, tagged in a dozen photos. A house with a blue door. A golden retriever. An anniversary post from just 4 months ago, her arms around his neck, with a caption about how she'd marry him all over again in a heartbeat. No hesitation. Daniel had a wife. A real, whole, loving, completely in the dark wife. And my girlfriend was booking a honeymoon suite with this man on my credit card, behind my back and behind Claire's back at the very same time. I sat with that for a long, long time in the dark of my home office. Because I realized, slowly, that I was not the only person in this city about to have their entire world detonated by a secret they didn't know existed. Somewhere across town was a woman named Claire, who thought her marriage was solid ground, who had absolutely no idea that her husband was about to vanish for 2 nights into an ocean view suite, with the woman he had apparently never truly let go of, on a stranger's dime. And I had a choice to make. I could quietly handle my own mess, cut Renata loose, and let Claire find out her own way. Someday, alone, blindsided, probably years from now. Or I could pick up the phone and give a total stranger the truth I would have wanted someone to give me. I'd like to tell you I agonized over it for hours. I didn't, not really. I found Claire, and I sent her a short, careful, deliberate message. No accusations, no drama, no exclamation points, just this. My name's Marcus. I have good reason to believe your husband Daniel and my girlfriend Renata are planning a trip together this coming Saturday. I have proof that it's happening, and I promise you I have no interest in causing you pain. If you would rather not know, tell me so, and I will delete this and never contact you again. But if you want the truth, I have all of it, and I think you deserve it far more than either of them deserve to keep it from you. And then I waited. I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling and second-guessed every word I'd sent, wondered if she'd think I was insane, a scammer, a liar. And then at 6 the next morning, in the gray light, my phone lit up on the nightstand with 3 words from a complete stranger that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of woman Claire was. She wrote back, "Tell me everything." So I did. We talked for 2 hours on the phone that morning. Claire and I, 2 people who had never once met, complete strangers, bound together by the exact same betrayal, coming at us from 2 different directions. She cried once, briefly, quietly, and then she stopped, and her voice changed. And I recognized the change instantly because it was the same one that had happened to me standing in my kitchen. The cold clarity, the floor looking up. She told me things over those 2 hours that made my stomach drop straight through the floorboards. Because it turned out this was not new. Not new at all. Daniel had done exactly this before, 2 years earlier. A different woman, and Claire had found out, and she had forgiven him. He had wept. He had begged. He had gone to therapy every week for a year. He had sworn on his mother, on their dog, on everything he claimed to hold sacred, that it would never, ever happen again. He had even bought her a ring, an upgrade, a bigger stone, a promise you could wear. And here he was, 2 years later, planning a weekend getaway with an old flame on another man's credit card, while his wife back home packed his gym bag for his fake golf trip and reminded him to take his allergy medicine so the pollen wouldn't get him. Claire told me about the therapy sessions she'd sat through beside him, holding his hand while he cried to a stranger about his fear of abandonment. She told me about the trip they'd taken to try to reconnect, the couple's retreat, the journaling, the whole expensive machinery of forgiveness she'd built with her own 2 hands, because she believed in the man she married. And she told me the detail that I think broke her more than the affair itself. Renata, my Renata, was the woman from 2 years ago. The same one. The affair he'd sworn was over, the one Claire had forgiven him for, had never actually ended. It had just gone quiet. Gone underground. For 2 years, he'd been telling both of us it was over, while it simply kept running in the dark, and my credit card had come along later to help fund the encore. When Claire said that, I heard her go silent on the line, and then I heard her take a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had that new steel in it, and she said, "So I've spent 2 years rebuilding a marriage to a man who never left the affair he promised he'd ended. I've been decorating a house that was on fire the whole time." And I said, "Yeah, I think we both have." Something settled between Claire and me on that call, something quiet and steady and unbreakable. We were not going to make a scene at that hotel. We weren't going to key any cars in the parking lot or scream in any marble lobby or throw any drinks. That was beneath both of us. And more importantly, it would have handed them the story. It would have let them be the victims, cornered by two crazy jealous spouses. No. We were both, it turned out, planners by nature. We were both people who had spent our whole lives being treated as if we were too trusting to ever notice, too soft to ever act, too comfortable to ever look down. And we were both, as of that morning, completely and permanently done being underestimated. Here was the plan, and I'll admit, laying it all out now, it was cold, it was surgical, but I'll stand by every single piece of it because every single piece of it was nothing more than the truth, delivered on time with a receipt attached. First, I would not cancel the reservation. That was the keystone of the whole thing. If I canceled it, they would simply book elsewhere and slip out of view. So the room would stand. The trip would happen. We would let them walk all the way in. Second, I called the hotel back as the cardholder, calm and friendly, and I made two small, boring changes that the front desk was more than happy to accommodate for their paying customer. And I want you to understand how easy it was, because that's the part that still amazes me. I didn't hack anything. I didn't lie about anything. I just called a hotel and told them the truth, that I was the man whose credit card was paying for the room, which I was, and I asked them a couple of routine questions about their policies. The woman on the phone was helpful and cheerful the entire time, treating me like exactly what I was, a valued customer protecting his account. I requested that the cardholder's ID be required at check-in to release the room, which is a completely standard fraud prevention measure that hotels love. And I added a polite note to the reservation asking that the front desk please phone the primary cardholder to verify authorization at the exact moment of check-in in case of any suspicious activity on the account. Suspicious activity. I almost laughed saying it. She thanked me for being so careful. She told me most people never think to protect themselves like this. If only she'd known. Small things, dull things, the kind of fine print nobody ever reads until the day it quietly detonates under them. That's the thing about revenge that the movies get wrong. It isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The most devastating thing in the world is a man who knows the rules better than you do, using them exactly as written, with a smile in his voice. Third, Claire and I locked in the timing down to the hour. She would let Daniel leave that Saturday morning as though nothing in the world was wrong. She would wave him off on his imaginary golfing guys weekend, hand him his packed bag with a smile, and give him just enough rope to fully commit, to actually make the drive, to actually walk up to that front desk with Renata on his arm and his whole chest out. And then, at the precise moment they tried to check in, the trap would close. Quietly. Professionally. No shouting required. There was one more thing Claire and I agreed on, and it mattered to both of us more than the plan itself. Whatever happened in that lobby, we would keep our dignity. We were not going to become a story the two of them could tell later, over drinks, about the crazy jealous spouses who ambushed them. No, we were going to be calm. We were going to be kind, even, in that terrible, surgical way. And we were going to let their own choices, their own faces, their own silence do all the damage. Because the cruelest thing you can do to a person who's built their whole life on getting away with it is to simply politely stop letting them. There was a bad moment on Friday night that nearly wrecked everything. Renata got a call while she was in the shower and left her phone on the counter, and it buzzed. And I saw the name Daniel, and a message preview that said, "Can't wait for tomorrow." And for one insane second I wanted to answer it, to type something back, to blow the whole thing up a day early out of pure fury. I didn't. I put the phone back exactly where it was, face down, angled the way she'd left it, and I went and washed the dinner dishes until my hands stopped wanting to throw something. The plan held. Barely, but it held. Saturday came. I have never in my entire life been so calm and so nauseous at the same time. Renata packed that morning, humming to herself in our bedroom, folding that dress I'd never seen into her weekend bag, and she told me, to my face, standing 3 feet from me, that she was heading upstate for a girls' spa weekend with her friend Dana, and could I be a love and water her plants, and she'd be back Sunday evening. She kissed me at the door. She actually said, "Love you, be good." And I said it right back, "Love you too." And I watched her drive away to a hotel I was paying for to meet a married man. And I did not feel like crying anymore. Not even a little. I felt like a man standing at the window watching a claim he'd known was fraudulent finally, undeniably, on camera, prove itself true. I drove to the resort. I did not go inside. I parked across the far end of the lot where I had a clean line of sight to the entrance. And I texted Claire, who was doing the exact same thing from the other side of the lot because she had insisted on being there in person. And I understood that completely, all the way to my bones. At 2 o'clock, right on schedule, Daniel's car rolled in. I watched him climb out, This perfectly ordinary-looking man in an expensive linen shirt. And then the passenger door opened, and Renata stepped out into the sunlight in that dress, laughing at something he'd said, reaching for his hand like it was the most natural and settled thing in the entire world. 3 years. 3 years of my life. My dinners. My future. Walking across a parking lot, holding another man's hand, wearing a weekend I had paid for down to the champagne. And I will tell you the honest truth. Watching it happen, with my own eyes, almost shattered the entire plan. Because for one white-hot second, every cell in my body wanted to fling open the car door and run across that lot screaming. But I didn't. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles went pale and I breathed and I let the second pass. And then I texted Claire one word. Now. And then I did the thing I had so carefully arranged 4 days before. I called the front desk. The same pleasant woman answered and I said, "Hi, this is Marcus, the card holder for the reservation that's checking in right now. And I understand you needed to verify authorization." And she said, "Oh yes, of course, one moment. They're actually right here at the desk this second." And I heard it. I heard all of it, every syllable, because she'd set the phone down on the counter without muting it, and the whole scene came through crackling and clear. I heard her say, "I'm so sorry, sir, but the card holder for this room is on the line, and he'll need to authorize the charge to release your key." I heard Daniel say, "What?" In that flat, stupid way people say what when the ground moves. I heard Renata's voice, that voice I knew better than my own, go from warm silk to cold steel in the space of half a second as she said, No, there must be some mistake. The room's already paid for." And I heard the front desk woman say, gently, "The card on file belongs to a Marcus, sir, ma'am. And are either of you Marcus?" And the silence that followed that question was, and I mean this with my whole heart, the single most satisfying silence of my entire life. And in that silence, that beautiful ringing silence at the front desk, I could picture it all so clearly. Renata's mind racing, running the numbers, trying to understand how the room she'd so carefully hidden had a phone line attached to it and a voice on the other end that knew her name. She would have looked at Daniel for help, and Daniel would have had none to give, because Daniel had walked into his own lie standing next to hers. Two people who'd spent months being so careful, so clever, so certain, standing at a marble counter realizing all at once that careful and clever aren't the same as safe. And that is the exact moment Claire walked in. She had been sitting in the lobby the whole time, a magazine open in her lap, completely invisible the way a calm and patient woman can make herself invisible when she chooses to. And she rose from her chair and she crossed that lobby, unhurried, in no rush at all, because when you're holding every card there's no reason to rush. And she came up beside her husband at the front desk, and she said in the sweetest, warmest, most devastating voice you have ever heard in your life, "Hi, honey. How was the drive up?" I would have given almost anything to see Daniel's face in that instant. Claire told me later that it did something she had never once seen a human face do in all her years of knowing him, that every drop of blood just drained straight out of it, that he actually reached out and gripped the edge of the counter to keep himself upright. And Renata, Claire said, Renata just looked back and forth between the two of them, Daniel and this smiling stranger over and over, like a woman trying to solve a math problem that kept coming out wrong, no matter how many times she ran it. And then the front desk woman, still holding my open phone line, still with me listening to every second of it, said the words that ended the whole thing. "I'm very sorry, but Marcus is declining to authorize the room." Declining to authorize the room, because that is exactly what I did. I let them walk all the way up to that counter, all the way into the deepest part of the lie, dressed up and holding hands and dreaming of champagne and a tasting menu for two, and then I very quietly, very politely, declined to pay for it, as was entirely and completely my right, as the man whose name had been on that card the whole time, from the very beginning. No scene, no screaming, no thrown drinks. Just a locked door, two people standing in a marble lobby with no room and no key and no ride out of the moment they'd built, and a wife who now knew every single thing. I hung up the phone, and then I sent Renata one text message. It said, "The plants don't need watering. I already took care of everything. Come home when you're ready to talk." And then I started the car, and I drove away, and I left the three of them standing in that lobby to sort out the wreckage of a weekend I had paid for, and would never regret ruining. I want to tell you that the drive home felt like a victory lap. It didn't. I got about 2 miles down the coast road, and I had to pull over into a gas station lot, because my hands started shaking. Not from fear, from everything. 3 years of it coming loose all at once now that the job was done, and I finally had permission to feel it. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes. I thought about the barbecue, the dog stealing burgers, the way she'd laughed and folded in half. I thought about the spare room and the crib we'd never buy now. I thought about how I'd told a woman I loved she looked beautiful in blue that morning. knowing exactly where she was going. And I let myself grieve it, all of it, for 20 minutes in a gas station lot, because a man is allowed to mourn even the thing that was quietly killing him. And then I wiped my face, and I bought a bottle of water, and I drove the rest of the way home to an apartment that was suddenly, finally, only mine. I want to tell you what happened after, because a story like this one doesn't actually end in a hotel lobby. It ends in the days and the weeks that come after, in the wreckage, in what people become when the mask finally comes off and they discover they can't get it back on no matter how hard they claw at it. Renata called me 11 times before she made it home that night. 11. I did not answer a single one of them. I wanted her to sit in it, alone, on that long, silent drive back, with no story left to tell and no audience left to tell it to, because for the first time in 3 years, there was nothing she could possibly say to me that I didn't already know, down to the timestamp. When she finally walked through our door that night, her makeup was gone, streaked and wiped away, and her voice had gone small and childlike, and she really did try, to reach for all the old familiar tools that had always worked before. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said Daniel had reached out to her first, that she'd been weak, lonely, that it had only just barely started. She said the trip was a stupid mistake she'd already been planning to cancel. Any lit het talk? I sat there at our flea market table, and I let her build the whole elaborate structure, brick by careful brick, the way she built everything. And then, when she finally ran out of bricks, I set my laptop on the table between us, and I turned it around to face her, and I showed her the timeline. The lingerie, 3 weeks ago. The steakhouse, the night she was working late. The florist, the flowers she'd sent him with my money. The room, all of it dated, sourced, itemized, undeniable, laid out in the same clean, cold format I used to shut down a fraudulent claim for good. And I watched the story die right there in her throat, because there was nothing left to argue with. Evidence doesn't cry. Evidence doesn't say it was a mistake. Evidence doesn't reach across the table for your hand. Evidence just sits there in the lamplight and tells the truth, over and over, as many times as you need to hear it. She asked me, in a whisper, how long I had known. I told her 4 days. She asked me why I hadn't just said something, why I hadn't confronted her, the moment I found out. And I told her, the truest thing I have ever said to another human being, because I wanted to see who you really were when you were completely certain that no one was watching. And now I know. She tried, once more, right at the end, when she saw the timeline wasn't going to crack. She started to cry. Real tears, or tears that looked real. And she said she loved me, that Daniel meant nothing, that it was me she wanted to build a life with, that she'd end it all and we could go to counseling and fix it. And I'll be honest with you, there was a version of me, a younger and softer version, that would have wanted to believe her, that would have taken that bait like a fish takes a hook. But I'd spent 4 days reading the paper trail of a woman who told me she loved me every single morning while spending my money to sleep with a married man every other night. Love wasn't the currency anymore. Evidence was. And so I said the only thing left to say. I said, you didn't get caught cheating, Renata. You got caught being exactly who you are. Those are different things, and only one of them can be forgiven. She moved out that week. It turned out, when you actually pulled it apart, that most of the life we'd built together was mine to begin with. The apartment, the card, the credit, the calm. She packed up her fabric samples and her half of the closet, and the very plants she'd asked me to water on her way out the door to cheat on me, and she left. And the next morning I removed her as an authorized user on my card with 2 clicks, and I braced for some enormous wave of feeling, grief or triumph or rage, and instead I felt the strangest thing of all, which was almost nothing. Not victory. Not heartbreak. Just quiet. A clean, wide, uninterrupted quiet, like a room after you finally turn off a noise you'd stopped noticing was there. As for Daniel and Claire, well, Claire didn't need 1 more ounce of my help after that lobby. She had absolutely everything she needed. She told me on our last phone call that she'd already sat down with a lawyer, that the affair 2 years earlier had come attached to certain very specific written promises, agreements about what would happen if he ever did it again, and that Daniel was about to learn a genuinely expensive lesson about the true price of a second chance. She thanked me, more than once. I told her, honestly, that she'd have found out eventually anyway, that the truth like that never stays buried. She said, maybe so, but you made sure I found out with my dignity fully intact, on my feet, in a lobby of my own choosing, standing next to a stranger who had my back and not alone in the dark years from now. And that meant a great deal to me because that had been the entire point from the very first message. Not revenge exactly, whatever people want to call it. Justice, delivered on time, with the receipt attached. I ran the numbers afterward, the way I always do, because numbers settle me. Renata had spent just over $2,000 of my money across 3 months, quietly building her affair. $2,000 of lingerie and steak and roses and hotel rooms. I disputed the fraudulent charges, the ones made to deceive the cardholder, and the bank refunded most of it back to me. Because as it happens, a romantic getaway you secretly booked to cheat on the very person paying for it does not, legally speaking, count as an authorized use of his account. She received a very unpleasant and very official letter about all of that some weeks later. Daniel, I heard through Claire, ended up paying for that weekend after all, one way and another, and a great deal more on top of it. There's one more piece I have to tell you, because it's the piece that finally let me close the book. About 3 weeks after she moved out, Renata texted me. A long one, the kind you can tell someone drafted 5 times before they sent it. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she knew she'd hurt me, but that people make mistakes, that our relationship had gone cold long before Daniel, that I'd been distant, married to my job, that in a way we'd both let it happen. And there it was again, the old move, the fold, the pivot, taking a knife she'd put in my back and gently turning it around until somehow it was pointing at me. 6 months earlier, that text would have worked. I'd have read it 3 times and started to wonder if she had a point, if maybe I really had been distant, if maybe I owed her something. But I wasn't that man anymore. That man had died in a kitchen with cold coffee in his hand. So I typed back one sentence. I said, I hope the next person you're with reads their statements. And then I blocked her number and I felt the book close in my chest, quietly, like a door in a house where everyone's finally gone to sleep. Her friend Dana called me too, a few days after that. Turns out Dana never knew a thing about being Renata's alibi. Renata had used her name for months as cover, the girls' weekends, the moving days, all of it. And Dana had no idea her name was doing all that lying. She called to apologize, mortified, though she'd done nothing wrong, and she told me something that stuck with me. She said, you know, she always talked about you like you were furniture, solid, reliable, something she owned. And I said, yeah, that sounds about right. But here's the thing about furniture, Dana, it's still standing here. And she's the one with nowhere to sit. People ask me sometimes, the few I've told, whether I regret how I did it, whether it was too cold, too calculated, too much like an ambush, whether I should have just confronted her the honest human second I found out, and let the whole thing be messy, and loud, and real. And I understand completely why they ask. I do. But here is what those 4 days taught me. And it's the one thing I'd want you to carry out of this story. When somebody shows you plainly that they are willing to look you in the eye and lie while spending your own money to betray you, the single kindest thing you can do for yourself is to believe them. Not their words. Their words will always be beautiful because words are free and easy, and she was an artist with them. Believe their actions. I did not set one single trap that Renata did not walk into on her own 2 feet, in a dress she chose, holding a hand she reached for. I didn't make her book that room. I didn't make her send those flowers. I didn't make her type the note that said just us two, no phones. She did every last piece of that herself, freely, joyfully, absolutely certain that I was too trusting and too dull and too comfortable to ever once look down. And that's the part I keep circling back to. Late at night, even now, she wasn't wrong that I trusted her. She was only wrong about one thing, one small, fatal thing. She thought trust and blindness were the same thing. They are not. They never were. You can love a person with your whole entire heart, and still, in the worst moment of your life, when the floor tilts hard beneath you, choose to kneel down and look and see exactly what it is you've been standing on all this time. I look down now, I'll probably look down for the rest of my life, at every floor I ever stand on. And part of me is genuinely sad about that. Sad that she took something from me I used to hand out for free without a second thought. But most of me, the larger and calmer part, is simply grateful that I still had the presence of mind, in the single worst moment of my life, standing in that kitchen with the cold coffee and the humming fridge, to be quiet, to be patient, and to read the fine print. It still comes back to me sometimes, out of nowhere, that Tuesday, that phone call, that cheerful voice reading me the details of a romantic weekend I never planned, and would end up quietly, completely destroying. The hotel called me on a Tuesday to confirm the couple's spa package for the honeymoon suite my girlfriend had booked for the weekend. And what she never knew, what she never for one single second considered, was that she had built her entire beautiful escape on the one bridge in the whole wide world that I would always, no matter what, own outright. My name was on the card, and in the end, after everything, that turned out to be the only fine print that ever mattered. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Wishing you all the best, stay healthy, and take care.